What's up, everybody? I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the skull. And I noticed that when I'm giving exams on the skull, sometimes people have trouble orienting themselves with the skull, especially when they're just looking at pictures. So I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about how to orient yourself with the skull, especially when you're looking at just photos. The first thing to keep in mind is that you got to have a reference point. All right. So here are some of the key reference points for myself when things get turned around. First, I always remember the front. Like this is my forehead. Specifically, this bone is known as the frontal bone, and the frontal bone is at the front. So this is the front of the skull. This is my face. And if this is frontal, then that means that the back is going to be the occipital bone, which is right here. And the occipital is going to be the back of the skull. Now that I've got my front and my back, now there's some other things that I need to keep in mind. For example, these are the orbits or the eye sockets of my skull. And if I'm looking above my eye sockets, then I'm looking here at the frontal bone. But if I'm looking below my sockets, that's when things get a little interesting. That's when I get to things like my cheekbones, which are also known as my zygomatic bones. And if I go just below there, I get to my maxilla or maxillae, um, which is talking about both of these two bones that make up my upper jaw. I like to say maxillary because maxillary is one. So that's my maxillary bone on my left side of my face. And this is the maxillary bone on the right side of my face. Put both of them together and then the maxillae. Uh, and so that's what's coming below here. My nose would be there, which this makes the nasal cavity. So any bones that are in reference to the nasal cavity, like the vomer, which is that shark fin bone back here, then that would be part of my nasal cavity. And look, right here that makes the roof of my nasal cavity are the nasal bones for my nasal cavity. So these are just some quick things to keep in mind when you're talking about orienting yourself with the skull. And I know for some of you, you might be a little more advanced, but it can get tricky when you're looking at pictures. Now, if I want to talk about one more thing, it's the bottom of the skull, the inferior side of the skull. The inferior side of the skull really irritates people because it just looks like nothing that they've ever seen before. So what we're going to do here for just a moment is we're going to see if we can get this, the top of the skull, the roof of the skull off here in just a moment. I think I've got it wedged on there pretty well. I got tired of it coming off during my other presentations. And if we flip this over, we can see the bottom of the skull, right? So this really throws people for a loop because you saw how I just flipped that around. So here was the front. And let's say that this person is looking up at the sky. They're looking at the stars. So they were looking at you. Now they look up. They're looking at the stars. And this is the part that we don't see because naturally there's muscle and skin covering the throat of that individual, the area that we refer to as the throat or the neck. So this is, more of the cervical region here. But if we were to use an x-ray machine and just look straight through the skin and the muscle and all of the connective tissue that's there, and we look straight through their throat, we would actually see the base of their skull. And your cervical vertebrae articulate right here. So your atlas and your axis, those two cervical vertebrae, they actually articulate here at the base of your occipital bone. And this is what also allows you to be able to nod your head and say yes. So once again, here's the front of the face. And then that looks up at the sky. And while they're looking at the sky, we're looking straight through their throat and we can see the base of the skull. And so we can look closely here and we can see these condyles the occipital condyles. These occipital condyles articulate with the C1 cervical vertebrae here. And this large hole right here is known as the magnum foramen. Magnum meaning large, foramen. A foramen is a hole in a bone that something important passes through. So I can't think of one foramen that's in any bone that doesn't have something very significant that passes through the hole. In this particular case, the magnum foramen is the hole that your spinal cord actually passes through. So yeah, that's kind of a sort of a big deal. So the spinal cord passes through that particular foramen, and then we can see other holes here. And these four holes here are responsible for arteries and veins, major artery and veins that pass through the skull, that's taking oxygenated blood to the brain in your skull and taking deoxygenated blood from the brain out of your skull. And so we can see this here. So when I see this giant hole and I see a picture of the skull and I see that giant hole, I automatically think that's the magnum foramen. That's the hole in the base of the skull. That's for my spinal cord to pass through. So that gives me some type of reference for what I'm looking at with the skull. You want to have reference points when you're looking at bones, like the skull. Um, there should be something major on the skull that automatically jogs your memory, that triggers your memory and says, oh, that's what that is. That must be the perspective that I'm viewing the skull. I'll give you one more. So you see this knob right here? This knob right here is the exact same knob that you feel behind your ear. Have you ever heard of something called the mastoid process? Probably not. Well, the mastoid process is a process is an extension off of a bone that something important attaches to. So it's usually like a tendon or a ligament, something that attaches to that process. A lot of times when you're learning processes and basic anatomy and physiology, the process will be an attachment point for a muscle, right? Which means that there's a tendon that attaches here. The sternocleidomastoid, which is a muscle that's in the side of your neck, it's a very large muscle in the side of your neck that actually allows you to be able to rotate your head from left to right, as well as be able to flex your head and neck. Part of that sternocleidomastoid muscle attaches to the mastoid process. This is that knob that you can palpate behind your ear. So literally, if you reach behind your ear, just behind your ear, you'll feel this weird little knob piece, and that's the mastoid process. And when I see that mastoid process, and I see that hole right here, which is my auditory canal, then that tells me, hey, I'm looking at a lateral view of the skull. So hopefully those little tidbits will help you when you're reviewing things for the skull. Oh, one more thing. When you're looking at the inside of the skull, this really throws people for a loop. Once again, I use this large hole as a reference point. This is going to be the magnum foramen. That's the same hole that was on the base of the skull that you saw earlier. If I flip that over, now I can see where that hole leads to. It leads to this cavern, this space inside of my skull. My brain is literally sitting inside of this osseous football helmet. And so the spinal cord comes up here. My brain is sitting inside this space. And then I can see this little notch sticking up. This is the crista galli right there, that little sharp piece. So that little shark fin is the crista galli. And the crista galli is a little shark fin that sticks up from the surface of my ethmoid bone. My ethmoid bone is sitting right there. It's about that big, and it looks like a peach pit. So if you don't know what that is, like the fruit, the peach, if you look at the pit of a peach, it's like about, the average one is like about that big. A peach pit would fit right there, and it looks like a peach pit that's sitting there. And the crista galli is right here. Right behind that is the sphenoid bone, which it has giant wings that take up this entire section here. All of this is the sphenoid bone. You can see the wings, the greater wings would be here, and then the lesser wings would be here. And then this is this little saddle that you could take an action figure and sit in. This little saddle is nicknamed the Turkish saddle. It's the sala turcica, and the sala turcica is actually where your pituitary gland sits down in that. Your pituitary gland gets special treatment. It's a little small gland that hangs off of the infundibulum of your hypothalamus, sits right down in here. Your pituitary gland literally creates a list of hormones that, if you didn't have those hormones, your life would be a total wreck. It's creating everything from follicle stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormone, the growth hormone. I mean, it's just a plethora of a whole bunch of different hormones. And yeah, your life would suck if you did damage to the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland gets its own little bat cave down in here in the sala turcica, aka the Turkish saddle. And so when I see that little thing, that tells me I'm smack dab in the middle of the skull, also right in the middle of the sphenoid bone, which is this bone that sits right across here. All of that is the sphenoid bone. Just in front of it is the ethmoid bone, and just behind it is the occipital bone. And that's what we have today for getting around and orienting myself with the skull.